I grew up poor in a rich neighborhood. And the only thing that I could figure to do was go to the library and start reading books. These are some of the 22 books that I've written here, and these are some of my books in other languages, 18 languages now.
Oh, wow.
I love the process of writing. I love the doing of the writing. You go to my website, you'll see, just hundreds of stories of examples of people who, change their questions, change their habits, change their results, and change their lives. When you say I can't do it because, you make yourself right, even if it's totally wrong. So we convince ourselves that we can't do things, and then we behave to make ourselves right. I am actually the only author in history to be published by those 6 publishers that you mentioned. No one else in the history of publishing has ever done that.
Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Noah St. John. Noah is recognized as the father of Affirmations and the mental health coach to the stars. He's worked with Hollywood celebrities, 7- and 8-figure company CEOs, professional athletes, top executives, elite entrepreneurs. He's famous for helping his coaching clients make more in 12 weeks than they did in the previous 12 months, which I've got some questions about, and we're going to find out how on this episode, which is pretty exciting. And we were just talking right before this, has published 22 books. I guess book number 22 coming out. And will have came out by the time this episode goes live, which is pretty nuts. Traditionally publishing experience, self-published experience. So both sides of the aisle, we'll be able to learn from both. I'm excited for this conversation. Noah, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Chandler. Great to be here.
So I guess first off, 22 books. Obviously, books are a big part of your business and a big part of your brand and all that stuff. Why books? Why is that such a big part of what you do?
It's so funny. One of my very first memories is in kindergarten when I was playing with blocks, and I was playing with blocks of letters. Now, you're probably too young. They probably didn't have this when you were in kindergarten or whatever. But when I was in kindergarten, they had these blocks of letters, learn your ABCs, A, B, C. And, so one of my first earliest memories is taking these blocks of letters and just making these long words. I always loved words. And I started reading before I was 2 years old. You can ask my mother this. She's a teacher, and my aunt was a teacher. So I grew up with, teachers and the arts and things like that. Lots of creative people. Both my parents and everybody that I grew up with were very creative people. So I always loved books. I loved reading and I loved learning. And another part of my story is that I grew up poor in a rich neighborhood. And I know that's a total cliche, but it's true. I grew up in a little town called Kennebunkport, Maine, which is one of the wealthiest communities in New England.
Oh, yeah.
My family
was
dirt
place.
poor. Exactly. Well, my family was dirt poor. I mean that literally. We lived at the bottom of a dirt road in a drafty, unfinished house that's my parents ended up losing to foreclosure when I was just 15 years old. So I hated being poor because I saw that right down the street, there's great wealth and abundance. So I literally said from the time I was a little kid, how the heck do I get from here to there? And the only thing that I could figure to do was go to the library and start reading books. No internet back then, so there was no YouTube or things like that. So I went to the library. So I basically grew up in the library. I grew up around books. And as you can see now from my, library behind me, these are some of the 22 books that I've written here. And these are some of my books in other languages, 18 languages now.
Oh, wow.
So I've just always been surrounded by books. I love books, and I love writing. And so I know I'm really weird because a lot of authors don't actually
like those
love
two things.
writing.
Yeah.
But I love the process of writing. I love the doing of the writing. I was listening to an interview with John Grisham, and he had a great quote that I remember. He said, writing books is really easy. It's selling them that's hard. I'm like, I hear you, buddy. I hear you, brother. So anyway, I love books, and that's why I did it.
So you talked about writing books is easy, at least for you, but selling them is hard. So yeah. How have you been so successful with your books? Like, how have you sold so many copies of your books? And yeah, actually, maybe let's start there.
Well, I'll never forget my very first book that was published in 1999. All right. So almost 25 years ago now. And actually it was self-published in 1998. So which is 25 years ago right now. And so back then in 1998, you remember being online in the 90s for the folks listening and watching the program, right? You remember the, right? And I mean, it was bad. It was basically just me and Al Gore back then. So it was like trying to build little internet humor for you there. Anyway, so Anyway, it was like trying to build a house with a rock and some sticks. It was like, forget it. And the only funnels was funnel cake. So I mean, forget it. There was no such thing as any of that stuff that we have today. So the point is that I literally had to go to a local copy shop, just a copy shop that, or store that was down the street, and I said, hey guys, how do you publish a book? And they said, well, here you just do this. I was like, look, I don't have any money. What's the cheapest way you can do it? They said, well, you can do tape bound. I said, what's that? It's bound with a piece of tape bound. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. So I mean, I published the ugliest book you've ever seen, self-published. There's no KDP or anything, of course, back then. And it was called Permission to Succeed. Well, so happened that I met Jack Canfield a year later, and he was in the same town that I was going to college. He went to the same college in Amherst, Massachusetts. And so I met him and showed him my self-published book, which was the ugliest book you've ever seen, but he loved it. And he totally got my message. He totally understood what I was doing. He sent my self-published book to the Chicken Soup publisher. And 8 weeks later, I got a call from the Chicken Soup publisher, and they said, we'd like to publish your book. So that's how I got my big break, really, there. But here's the funny thing about that. I swear this is true. I figured the way that it happened is that, I get published week 1, week 2, I'm on Oprah, and week 3, I'm a millionaire. That's what I figured. I swear I thought that. That didn't exactly happen that way. Not exactly how it works, And so it was a hell of a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. Much, much, much harder. And so that's why I love what you're doing, Chandler. I mean, I'm a huge fan of yours. I'm a huge fan of Self-Publishing School. I think you're doing great work, helping so many people, whether it's first-time authors or people who've authored many books, to really, really get a leg up on the competition. So, that's why I'm a big fan and excited to be here today.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. So how would you say, like, those first 10,000 copies, like, what did you do? Was it, I mean, I know you talked about kind of, I feel like a lot of authors experience it's like, oh, cool, I'm traditionally published. Now they're going to publish my book. Right. And we always tell people it's called book publisher, not book marketer. That's right. They're not going to market your book. You as the author, whether you're self-publishing, traditionally publishing, doesn't matter. You're responsible for selling books. 100%. So what was maybe like 1 or 2 things that worked the best and strictly in like that first 10,000 copies?
Yeah, absolutely. I really did. I came into this business with stars in my eyes, and like I said, I thought I'd be a millionaire in the first week, and didn't exactly happen that way. But I remember going exactly what you said. I had to learn what you just said the hard way, and I literally was like, why aren't you guys doing something? To the publisher, I'm like, why aren't you doing something? And they would literally do nothing. And I'd be like, hello, don't you want to sell books? And they said to me, basically what you just said, which is, well, that's up to you, dumb. I'm like, oh, thanks a lot. Wait, what? So I had to it was just hustle, just like Gary Vee talks about. It was just pure hustle. And I would do tons of book signings. And back then, of course, things were totally different than they are right now. Frankly, the tools that we all have available as authors today are so much better. Of course, that's the good news and the bad news. The good news is that the tools are so much better. The bad news is the competition is increased by a factor of 100,000, so there's just so much noise out there. It's really, really hard, much, much harder to really stand out. So the point is, the number one thing that I did, and that, every successful author really has to do, is build an audience. You have to build your email list. I know you teach that to your clients, and that's what I teach my clients as well, is you've got to build a tribe. You've got to build a tribe of people who know, like, and trust you, and you have to own that list. All right. And so I am a huge proponent of email marketing, right? There's so many people you hear, oh, email marketing is dead. Really? Okay. How's Clubhouse going for you these days? Whatever. There's always a shiny object. There's always a new gimmick. There's always a new fad, but there are the things that will always work. Look, every marketing anything always decreases over time. And why? Because, as my good friend Gary Vee says, marketers ruin everything. Marketers ruin everything. And that will never not change. Okay. Or I should say that will never change. That will never change. That will never not be true, is what I meant to say. My point is that, so just, I mean, I remember in the 90s, right, when I started, I mean, email open rates were what, 70, 80%,
Mm-hmm.
Well, now you're lucky to get what, 12%,
Mm-hmm.
15%, whatever. So, I mean, everything stops work, or I should say decreases over time. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, we know with advertising, the costs go up and the conversions go down. Look
Right.
at Facebook, look at TikTok, look at whatever you want, So whenever anything starts, and my good friend and our mutual friend Rich Sheffrin talks about this all the time, that at the beginning of any marketing tactic, it's really, really good because it's
Mm-hmm.
new. But then
Mm-hmm.
marketers come in, they ruin everything, and then it stops working. So
Mm-hmm.
I will just reiterate that I don't know of any other strategy that is more important than building an email list of people who know, like, and trust you as an author. That way, whatever you choose to put out, if you put out 1 book, 5 books, 10 books, or in my case, 22 books, you have a warm, receptive audience that says, hey, what do you got now? And I can't wait to read it.
That's good. And so it's a good lesson for people. Hey, marketers run everything. Early days of a new fad or marketing channel might be good, but they're going to diminish and stick to the tried and true. You mentioned book signings. So I'm sure there was some in-person stuff, some speaking stuff, and then long-term, it sounds like the big takeaway is invest in your email list. And it's an owned asset, not a borrowed asset. You're kind of on your own playground versus playing on somebody else's playground. And when you're playing on somebody else's playground, the rules to that playground could change. The playground can close down. There's a lot of kind of unknown variables. Talk to me about, 22 books. I feel like a lot of times as authors, like you've got 1 or 2 books that just really hit. Mm-hmm. And from a bunch of people I've interviewed on this podcast, it's like, there's no, it's like, well, why? Like, why do you think? And a lot of times there's no rhyme or reason, but screw it, I'll ask it anyway. For you, like, which of the 22 books has sold the best? Mm-hmm. And any rhyme or reason or kind of why behind that, as you can understand it?
Well, I don't have the exact numbers, but I'm going to guess, and I'm pretty sure this is true. And if you go on Amazon and just look at the, like the number of reviews, 5-star reviews that I have, this is actually my most popular book. It's called the Book of Affirmations, and this was published by Hay House. Mm-hmm. Now, I had a dream to be published by Hay House because in the 1990s, the early 90s, before I ever wrote a book, I was going back to the library. I was in the library, just grew up in the library. I spent lots and lots of time in the library, hours and hours and years, really. And one of my dreams was to be a Hay House author. And the reason is because I read lots of Hay House books, right? The Spiritual Growth, they're the #1 self-help publisher in the world. Louise Hay, Marianne Williamson, Deepak Chopra, just the biggest names in the self-help spiritual world, which I was really immersed in. And so after in 1997, when I really discovered things that were missing in this industry, I'm talking about the self-help industry now, in the personal growth industry, because I had immersed myself in that environment and reading all those books and studying all these guys, and I went, okay, what's missing? What aren't they telling us? And I think that's an important lesson because for any author, the one thing you don't want to do is just, be a me too, be a recycle, be a regurgitation of everybody else. And you see that everywhere. I mean, everywhere is just guys and gals who are just saying the same thing that everybody else does. And it's like boring, it's just, oh my God, we've heard this a million times and you're boring, and the one thing you can't do is bore people because that way, or if you do, you're never going to get their attention. And so I discovered something, totally new and unique in the field of self-help, which is my method of affirmations. You'll notice this is spelled AFFORMATIONS, affirmations, not affirmations. So, of course, every self-help book ever written talks about affirmations. Well, I invented this method called affirmations. And Reed Tracy, who's the CEO of Hay House, one of the most respected, people in the entire publishing industry, he called me one day and he said, hey, Noah, we'd like to publish your book of affirmations. You'll notice that this is the 4th edition. I know it's hard to see there, but anyways, this is the 4th edition. So I actually published 3 editions of this book before the Hay House edition because I just wanted to get my message out, to the world. And so when Hay House published it, I mean, Hay House is Hay House. I mean, they're the 800-pound gorilla. And so, for the rest of my life, I can say I'm a Hay House author. And what's so funny is a lot of my friends, as a result, they decided to be Hay House authors author. A lot of my, colleagues in the industry, they saw me doing it and they're like, hey, I want to be a Hay House author. So they did. And it's like, you're welcome, yeah. But anyway, so that one really, I think people absolutely love for a very simple reason, because this works. It is incredibly powerful and incredibly simple, and frankly, incredibly life-changing. So just for the fact of the quality of the work, that is really what has sold many copies of the book. I would say the second one is called Power Habits. This is was published by Nightingale Conant, who is a traditional audiobook publisher. Well, the CEO of Nightingale Conant, Vic Conant, called me one day a few years ago and he said, hey, Noah, we're going to get into the book publishing industry now, because they've been doing audio only for 50 years. And I had done two programs with them. I've done two audio programs with Nightingale Conant, and it was the Power Habits system and the Power Habits of ultimate self-confidence. So I talked about, anyway, the power habits of unconsciously successful people. So what I realized is that the Affirmations book is part of the Power Habits. So in other words, I created this system. And again, I'm showing you part of the book here. On page 100, you'll see Affirmations is part of the system. So the way that I did this is I designed this book to be really a workbook, a template, a guide for people who had studied lots of self-help and had spent lots of money and gone to all these seminars, but they were still stuck. And so that's why you mentioned, in your introduction, that I'm known for helping my clients make more in 12 weeks than they did in the previous 12 months. Well, that's really how I do it. So I laid it out in the book.
It's the Power Habits.
And people really, really love it. And that's, why they gravitate to it.
Got it. Lots to unpack there. I hope you're loving this episode so far. So if you're serious about writing and publishing your book, we would love to chat with you and help create a custom plan. All right. So all you need to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. Schedule a 45-minute consultation with one of the experts on my team. All right. Let's implement what you're learning in this episode and let's see how we can help with your book. Go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. Two kind of veins of thoughts.
Yes.
One is, so you talked about that selling the best with Hay House. Was that something that Hay House did? Were you still largely responsible for marketing the book? Like,
it was me. It was me.
Yeah.
It was me. I love Hay House, but man, it was me. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It was, I don't want to say it was all me, but it was all me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but again, with Hay House being the 800-pound gorilla, I can walk into any room, anything, and anybody knows anything.
Doors. Yeah,
exactly. Anybody knows anything
that you can then push open.
Exactly. Yeah. You're a Hay House author? Okay, come on in, And so yeah, it does carry a lot of weight.
That makes sense. So talk to me about what's the difference between affirmations and afformations?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the things that I discovered way back in 1997, over 25 years ago. So an affirmation, as we all know, if you've ever read a self-help book, they all say the same thing, right? Say these statements, a positive statement, blah, blah, blah. Like for example, as a keynote speaker, I'm a coach, I'm a keynote speaker and an author. And as a keynote speaker, I like to play a game with my audience members. I say, okay, everybody, we're going to stand up and say a traditional affirmation, just like those guys, have been teaching us for decades. All right, everybody say, I am rich. And everybody goes, I am rich. You know what happens next? Everybody starts laughing. And I go, what are you laughing at? And they go, well, I'm not rich. And I say, but you just said you were. And they go, yeah, but I don't believe it. And see, that's the thing. We say these positive statements, but we just don't really believe it. We're like bashing into our brain. In fact, interestingly, a study was done about this very topic, and it found that 75% of people who use the old affirmations method end up more frustrated than before. So imagine if you had a smartphone, right? Imagine you had a smartphone and it didn't work 3 out of the 4 times you tried to use it, right? You'd probably get a new phone. So that's what I invented. I invented a better phone, which is your brain, right? So how to use your brain. So an affirmation, again, this method that I invented is an empowering question. So the human brain actually responds automatically to questions. It's called the embedded presupposition factor of the brain. It's just a fancy way of saying when you ask a question, your brain searches for the answer. And so I said, why are we going around making statements we don't believe when the human mind responds automatically to questions? And so that's what affirmations is. So, and by the way, this word affirmations that I invented comes from the Latin word formare, which means to form or give shape to. So the question I often ask my audience members or my coaching clients, whether it's one-on-one coaching or group coaching, I'll often say to them, what if you're making something firm, but it's in the wrong form? That means you form the life you didn't even want. And you do that through the power of your questions. So using my affirmations method, you can take conscious control of the questions you're asking, change your questions, change your habits, change your results. and thereby change your life.
And so give me an example of an author affirmation. So let's say I want to sell more books.
Yeah.
I want to sell more copies of my book.
Right.
Maybe how would I do that in the traditional affirmation model?
Right.
And then how would that be different? And what's an example of doing that in the affirmation model?
Right. So an affirmation would be, I'm a successful author, or, it's easy for me to sell a lot of books, right? Those are statements. And you're like, your brain goes, no, you're not. Right. No, it isn't. That sounds stupid. Right. I call it the yeah, right response. Your brain goes, yeah, right. Right. We say the statement, we want to believe it, but we just don't. So an affirmation, you bypass the yeah, right response using the embedded presupposition factor of brains. You'd say, why am I such a successful author? Why is it so easy for me to sell lots of copies of my books? Now your brain goes, what? But see, because you're asking a question, you actually don't hit your brain. And so it's like instead of hitting a brick wall, you take a left, and your brain figures out a way to do it. Now, it's not magic, all right? What I teach you in my books and my coaching and my courses is, this isn't magic. What they taught you in The Secret, right? We all saw The Secret, and they say, if you think about money, it just pours in from the sky. Think about a car and it magically shows up. Really? What planet's that on again? Because I'd move to that planet tomorrow where you don't have to do anything, right? Just think about money and it just appears. On planet Earth, we have to do this annoying thing called take action if we want results. So that's what I teach, but it's the foundation, going back to my power habits I was talking about, it's the foundation of everything that you do to get better results.
I see. So you look at it as ask the question, and then the question creates the tension that defaults your brain towards, okay, what are the actions that I need to take, versus just tension that's, all right, well, I'm not that person.
I can't do it.
Fill in the blank, but it's like almost sounds like a more practical, action-oriented way to do that.
Yes, indeed. And if you go to my website, you'll see, just hundreds of stories of examples of this, of people who, change their questions, change their habits, change their results, and change their lives. And I could tell you tons of stories about that. But anyway.
That's really interesting, because I feel like what you've done there was just super smart marketing-wise, is you've kind of picked a big mainstream thing that a lot of people were bought into, and then you've kind of done an us versus them.
That's right.
Okay, here's why this is wrong. Here's why everything you know about affirmations
That's right.
is wrong, and here's what to do instead. Was that intentional? Was that kind of like, did you kind of stumble into that? What was kind of the why behind that? And is there anywhere else in your business where you've done that? In your business or with your books where you feel like you've done that successfully?
I've always done that, but it was never from a marketing standpoint. I wish I was as good a marketer, as a lot of these guys out there, because I would have done it a lot smarter and a lot better, a lot earlier. So I had to catch up with myself because I discovered affirmations in April of 1997. I discovered power habits in October of 1997. All of everything that I've done is an us versus them, or here's what they're not telling us. If you want to, that's what I say, because they just don't tell us. So going back to my power habit system, the full title is The Power Habits of Unconsciously Successful People, meaning what highly successful people do unconsciously that they don't even know they're doing, number one. Therefore, number two, they can't teach you. That's why, people, like, there was one client who had spent tens of thousands of dollars on all these different, self-help. And that's really mostly who I work with. People who spent lots and lots of money and they're still stuck. They hit that, as I call it, the income ceiling. They keep hitting an income ceiling and nothing that they're doing is helping them. I'm saying that's because they left everything out. And we actually helped them increase by 600% in less than 1 year. So just hockey stick growth, like, right through.
And how'd you do that?
Because of these power habits. They're unconscious habits that these people are doing that they're never going to tell you.
So what are the power habits?
Well, that's what I mean. That's why affirmations is the first one.
I see.
Highly success. That's, again, it goes back to the system. So this is a lot like Stephen Covey's, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You notice that we did a framework. And by the way, that's a really good example for every author. You want to have a framework. So you're not just saying, hey, do this.
Yes.
And it's just a bunch of tactics. And the person's like, well, what? I don't get it. But when you give them a framework, you're literally changing their thought patterns and their behavior. That's what I've done. Again, I did all of this without knowing what I was doing. And it took me a long time for my marketing to catch up with the content. Usually it's the other way around. But for me, that's what it was. So I'm like, oh, that's actually really good. I should do an us versus them. Great idea.
when the frameworks help people attribute it back to you.
That's
right.
right.
So, and
right.
this is a huge, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Noah. Like this is a huge thing I messed up with a lot of my early books is I would teach great content, but not take that extra like 5% of time to say, hey,
Yep.
how does this come into a framework? And so like, that's with my newest book published, it's like, okay, the 4 P's of a best-selling book, the more writing method, which was like, it was a process that I taught for years, but then everyone rips it off and no one uses it to me because there's no framework, there's no process, right? And so I love that you mentioned that. Take that extra time, crystallize the framework. It'll help people learn better. It'll help people implement better, and it'll be real estate that you own. Kind of like, I noticed that you've been intentional about doing registered trademarks on, Affirmations and the book of Affirmations and stuff like that. Which is smart. So going back to those power habits, and this will kind of circle to the loop I opened at the beginning of the podcast of, okay, someone making more in 12 weeks than they did in 12 months. So you said, hey, power habit number 1 is the law or the art or whatever of affirmations.
Yep.
So that's number 1. What's 1 or 2 of the other power habits that are most helpful for people looking to kind of exponentially increase their income?
Well, 1 is really, as I call it, taking out your head trash. So the head trash is the voice in your head that says, I can't do it because, all right. And so when you say I can't do it because, you make yourself right, even if it's totally wrong. So we convince ourselves that we can't do things, and then we behave to make ourselves right. So one of the power habits is understanding, number 1, what is your head trash? What is that voice in your head that says, I can't do it because? And then number 2, understand that you don't have to keep listening to that person, that guy in your head that says, I can't do it because, so what many people say is, well, I can't do it because I'm too old, because I made too many mistakes, because I'm divorced, because I'm a woman, because I'm, whatever. And they give every excuse in the book. And yet you can point to a person in that exact situation who's gone on to great success. And so you want to understand that just because you're telling yourself you can't do it, that doesn't make it true. I'll give you an example of that. We have we have a program called the 12-week breakthrough, where we help people make more than 12 weeks than didn't pass 12 months. And the point is, you can learn about that on our website. But my point is that we had one woman from Arizona. She's an entrepreneur, and she had exactly what I was describing. She was a self-help junkie, going, and that's her words. She was going to all these seminars and, running around and spending all this money, but she kept hitting that income ceiling. And so I taught her about affirmations and head trash and, getting her foot off the brake, as I call it, and all these different, the power habits. Well, she tripled her investment in 2 weeks. She tripled in 2 weeks. And we hadn't even gotten to the money part yet. That's how powerful these unconscious habits are. Not only that, she decided to really face her fears, and she decided to actually enter a bikini contest for the first time. And she came in 3rd place. Well, guess what? She's 69 years old, and she entered a bikini contest for the first time. I mean, she's in amazing shape, but how about that for taking out your head trash? 69 years old, entering your first bikini contest. I mean, to me, that's really amazing.
That's wild. I love that. The concept of taking your foot off the brake. I think this is a great analogy. So I want to talk a little bit about your publishing experience. So obviously you've self-published. You've also worked with HarperCollins. You work with Hay House. You work with Simon & Schuster. You've published with Mind Valley. You've published with Nightingale Conant. You've published with the Chicken Soup for the Soul publisher. So one of the more diverse publishing experiences, people that we've had on the show. So I guess with that in mind, which was the best experience between all those? And then what were maybe some comparisons? And, obviously, this is no knock on any of these publishers or whatever, but I'd love for you to speak as freely as you can of just like, hey, this was the best experience. Here's just so people can kind of come in with eyes wide open, depending on which route, which publisher they pick.
Well, I am actually the only author in history to be published by those 6 publishers that you mentioned. No one else in the history of publishing has ever done that. Been published by Hay House, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, Mind Valley, Nightingale Conant, and Chicken Soup for the Soul publisher. Nobody's done it. Tony Robbins hasn't done it. Deepak, no name that you can name has done it other than me. So I'm the only person in history that's ever done that. And so I do have a very wide range of experience in both self-publishing and traditional publishing. In fact, we have a book done for you service as well. I'm working with a stem cell doctor right now because he said, no, I've got this book rattling around in my head. I've had it rattling around for years, but I see what you're doing, and can you help me? And so, yes, I mean, so we have that service as well. We get books done. In fact, we decided to co-author it because, he's like, no, I want your name on this too. So we have that service too. So what I would say is I actually put all traditional publishers basically, in the same pile, and they're all great. And they have very severe limitations. So here's how I describe it. It's very simple. When you do self-publishing, you do all the work and you keep all the money. When you do traditional publishing, you do all the work and they keep most of the money. And people say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I do that? The answer is for one word. And the one word is distribution. That is what traditional publishers can give you that I don't want to say you can't do it, but it's freaking hard. Okay. In other words, Hay House, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, they have armies of salespeople all around the world. So that's how I've been published in 18 languages, as I was showing you before. If I would have had to do this, I probably wouldn't have done it. It's a hell of work. And so they have these armies of salespeople, and also they have people who want to sell your books in other languages, right? Because they make money when they sell the rights. So, I'm in Hungarian and Chinese and Japanese and French and Portuguese and on and on and on, right? So the publisher makes money and I make money. So the point is that distribution is worth a lot. Again, going back to my point that I made earlier, being able to say that I'm a Hay House author, I'm a HarperCollins, and I'm the only author in history to be published by the big 6 publishers. Again, that carries some weight, to some, in some audiences, in some circles, people go, wow, okay, that's pretty cool. And of course, it does help me get clients because they know, hey, I've done it all different ways. I know the ins and outs of this industry. I've been doing it 25 years. I can show you the mistakes to avoid, mistakes I wish someone would have told me to avoid, many years ago, and how to get it done very, very quickly. So like with that book Done For You service, I mean, we get it done in, 4 to 8 weeks instead of taking years and years and years that the person, would normally do. We had just a real quick story. This is funny. I had one client and she said, no, I want to publish a book. And I said, okay, no problem. So where we always start is, well, first of all, do you have a book? Is it done? Do you have a manuscript? She said, oh yeah, I've got a manuscript. Okay, great. By the way, so where is your manuscript? She says, well, it's in a shoebox in my closet. Okay. I'm just curious. I asked her, I said, so I'm curious. So how long has it been in a shoebox in your closet? She said 15 years. It's okay. Well, yeah, you see, head trash, fear, keeping her stuck. I said, maybe we want to get it out of the shoebox, out of the closet, and maybe we could share it with the world. So, just helping her to get her that self-confidence that she could do it. And now she's actually published many books. So, I mean, just getting her over that hurdle was it was priceless.
Cool. Well, Noah, this has been great, man. Talk to me, last question. Knowing what you know now, 22 books later, what would be your parting piece of advice for the Noah from 22 years ago, or not 22 years ago, how many ever years ago and 22 books ago? Yeah. What would be your parting piece of advice?
Get help and do your research. I spent over $750,000 paying all these marketing gurus only to find out they can't teach their way out of a paper bag. They truly suck at teaching. They're great self-promoters, but there's no there. There's nothing there. And so that really sucked. It really, cost me years and cost me a lot of money, and it hurt my self-confidence. So the point for everybody watching and listening to the program is, do get help. It's really hard. I mean, there's a lot of ins and outs. There's things you don't know. It's like climbing Mount Everest. You want a Sherpa, you want somebody who's been to the mountaintop, right? To help you get there and not fall and hurt yourself. So I wish I would have had better advice, much earlier, because I got a lot of bad advice, and that really, really cost me. So be careful of the people who are really, great at self-promotion, but do your homework and see, have they helped other people succeed? Have they helped other people get results? Not just about them. When it's just about them, then it's like, it's personality-driven success, as I call it. There's a big difference between personality-driven and system-driven success. You want to find a coach, a mentor who's got a system, and that's who you work with, because that way it can work for anybody.
Cool. Noah, thank you so much, man. This has been awesome. Where can people go to find out more about you and buy your books and all that good stuff?
My main website is noahstjohn.com. That's my name, just like it sounds, NOAHSTJOHN. You go to Affirmations.com, learn more about that. And by the way, if you go to breakthroughwithnoah.com, that's a new site we have, breakthroughwithnoah.com. And there's an 11-minute training video on how I help my clients make more than 12 weeks than in the previous 12 months at breakthroughwithnoah.com. By the way, I want to real quick, we didn't even get to mention this, but my new book is The 7-Figure Expert. And that I don't even have it to show in my hands. I mean, that's how new it is, but it's 7figureexpertbook.com. That is free. plus shipping. So if you want to check that out, sevenfigureexpertbook.com and breakthroughwithnoah.com. Those would be the two places I think would be great to start.
Awesome. You said sevenfigureexpertbook.com?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Awesome. Sevenfigureexpertbook.com. That's the new book. Check it out, y'all. Noah, thank you so much, man. Appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you could be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode.